John sat quietly in the back corner of the funeral home, his eyes barely focusing on the flickering candlelight in front of him. The somber murmurs of his relatives filled the air, but he could barely hear them over the buzzing in his own head. His father, the man who had always been a steady presence in his life, was now gone, leaving behind a void that seemed impossible to fill. While John tried to process his grief, the rest of the family's whispers seemed to center on one thing: the inheritance. Suddenly, Matt, his brother-in-law, stood up, clearing his throat and commanding the room's attention. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice steady, but with an underlying tension. All eyes turned to him, including John's. Matt's gaze flickered toward Lisa, John's sister, before he continued, "It's the will, and it states that all of Dad's wealth, including the millions in stocks and assets, should go to Lisa." John's heart skipped a beat. His sister, the one who never worked a day in her life, who lived off their father's wealth and never seemed to care about the struggles others faced. The room fell into stunned silence. Whispers broke out as John's mind raced. Was this a joke? Or worse, had their father really thought Lisa deserved all of this? His hands tightened into fists, his grief now mixed with confusion and disbelief. John had always been the quiet one in the family, the one who stayed out of drama and took care of things. He was the dependable son, the responsible brother. While his sister Lisa had never had to lift a finger for anything, John had spent his life working hard to provide for his own family. His job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and he had always found satisfaction in doing things the right way. Lisa, on the other hand, was the golden child in their father's eyes. She had always been the one to receive the most attention, the one who could charm her way into anything. She never seemed to need to work for what she had, and yet their father had continuously bailed her out of trouble, financial or otherwise. She would spend recklessly, go on extravagant vacations, and yet somehow always end up back at their father's doorstep when the bills piled up. John couldn't understand it. He had always been the one to do the right thing, working hard, paying his own way, and making sure his family had what they needed. But his father had always forgiven Lisa's mistakes, always found a way to make sure she was comfortable. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. The frustration had been building for years, but today, with Matt's announcement, it felt like a betrayal. John's father was gone, and with him, any hope of fairness. Now, the inheritance, millions of dollars, stocks, and property, was all going to Lisa, the one who had never had to worry about money, the one who had never known what it meant to struggle. John wasn't sure how to feel. There was anger, sure, but there was also confusion. How had things gotten this far? And what now? Would this be the last straw for their already fractured family? The family gathered in the lawyer's office, tense and expectant. John sat with his arms crossed, trying to suppress the storm of emotions brewing inside him. Lisa, on the other hand, sat at the table, her posture straight and confident. She'd always believed that the inheritance was hers by right. After all, she was the eldest daughter, and her place in their father's heart was indisputable. At least, that's what she thought. Matt, standing beside her, looked no less assured, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. They were convinced that today would simply confirm what they already knew. The inheritance was going to Lisa. The lawyer, an older man with a calm demeanor, cleared his throat and began reading the will. He paused, as though reading something over again, before his voice, steady but with an air of gravity, continued. "There is a matter that needs to be addressed before we proceed with the distribution of assets. It concerns the paternity of Lisa." A murmur rippled through the room. John looked at Lisa, her face a mask of confusion, and then back at the lawyer. "Lisa," the lawyer continued, "is not the biological daughter of your late father. The words hung in the air like a heavy, suffocating fog. John's heart raced, his mind scrambling to make sense of what he'd just heard. Lisa's face went pale, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. She stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped across the floor. Matt's face contorted into confusion, quickly followed by disbelief as well. What are you talking about?" Lisa's voice was strained, trying to make sense of the words, but she was struggling. "That's impossible. I'm his daughter. His daughter." The lawyer looked at her with sympathy. "I'm sorry, Lisa, but your father was not your biological parent. You were adopted." The silence in the room was deafening. John remained calm, his mind slowly processing the revelation. All the years of resentment, all the questions he'd asked about his father's favoritism toward Lisa, suddenly made sense. But it didn't take away the shock of what was happening in that moment. Lisa's gaze flickered between her mother, the lawyer, and John. "Mom," she demanded, her voice growing shrill, "why didn't you ever tell me? How could you keep this from me?" Her anger shifted, boiling into rage. "You let me believe that I was Dad's daughter, that I deserved all of this. How could you lie to me like this?" The family stood in stunned silence as Lisa's accusatory eyes turned toward her mother and then toward Matt. "You," she spat, "you always stood by me. You let me believe this. Let me think that this inheritance was rightfully mine." The storm that followed the lawyer's revelation was immediate. Lisa's anger was a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. "This is outrageous," she yelled, her voice sharp with disbelief. "This whole thing is a lie. John, you knew this, didn't you? You knew all along, and now you're just waiting for the inheritance to be handed to you." John stood still, his face expressionless as Lisa's accusations flew at him like daggers. "What are you talking about, Lisa?" he finally asked, his voice cold but steady. "I didn't know anything about this, and neither did Dad. What difference does it make now anyway? You're not the biological daughter, but that doesn't change what the will says. It's not yours." Matt's face twisted in frustration. He stepped forward, pointing a finger at John. "You think this is yours? You're trying to rob my wife of what's rightfully hers," he growled. "If you think you can just waltz in here and take everything, you're wrong." John's gaze didn't waver, but beneath his calm exterior, a boiling anger was rising. Matt's greedy eyes betrayed his true intentions. The man had always been in it for the money, and this sudden turn of events only further revealed his selfish motivations. Any more? The lawyer's expression remained impassive as he looked at the documents before him. But it wasn't just the financial mismanagement that stood out. "Furthermore," he added, "it has come to light that Matt Lawson, your husband, has been involved in several of these transactions. He too has been complicit in encouraging Lisa's reckless spending and, in some cases, using her finances for his own benefit." John's mind reeled. It had always seemed like Matt was too eager to attach himself to Lisa, but now it was clear. Matt had been using her for his own gain, and their marriage had likely been a strategic decision, not one based on love. As Matt shifted uncomfortably beside Lisa, John remained calm. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he knew one thing for sure. His father's decision wasn't just legal. It was wise. It was clear that Lisa and Matt had dug their own graves. Lisa's fury reached new heights as she slammed her fists onto the table. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice raw with anger. "You think you've won? You haven't seen the last of me." Her desperate eyes flashed toward Matt, her fury consuming her every word. "I'll make sure you pay for this, John. I will take everything from you. You're not getting a cent from this family." Matt stood beside her, his jaw clenched, a hard look in his eyes. His usual calm demeanor had shattered, replaced with a dangerous energy that matched Lisa's. "We'll see about that," he muttered, stepping away from the table. You think you can just walk away with everything? John stood unmoved, his eyes unwavering as his sister's angry tirade echoed in his ears. The more Lisa and Matt fought, the more they exposed their true selves, greedy, selfish, and broken. John could feel the weight of their destructive path pressing in on him, but he knew he couldn't let it drag him down. His focus was on his mother, and that's where his energy had to go. The tension between the family members only intensified in the days that followed. Lisa and Matt's relationship seemed more fractured than ever, with Lisa spiraling deeper into a toxic mix of resentment and desperation. It was clear that they weren't going to walk away quietly. One evening, as John and his wife Sarah were driving home from a visit with their mother, a car suddenly swerved into their lane. The screech of tires and the crash that followed left John's heart racing. They came to a halt, shaken but uninjured, just inches from disaster. Looking through the rearview mirror, John's heart pounded as he recognized the car. Matt's. The wreckage was significant, and the police arrived moments later to find Matt and Lisa at the scene, their faces a mixture of shock and frustration. "Is this another one of your stunts, Matt?" John thought bitterly as they exchanged glances with the officers. But the truth was more unsettling. Was this an accident? Or had Matt intentionally swerved into their lane to manipulate the situation? To cause chaos? To make John feel threatened? As the police continued their investigation, John couldn't shake the eerie feeling that there was more to the crash than met the eye. With every passing moment, it seemed more likely that this wasn't a simple mistake. Could Matt's desperation for money and control have driven him to dangerous lengths? The family was falling apart, and John was beginning to wonder if anyone could escape the destruction left in Lisa and Matt's wake. The suspense lingered. Was the crash truly an accident, or was there something more sinister behind it? The investigation into the crash began almost immediately. Matt's claim that it had been a simple accident started to unravel as inconsistencies in his story became clear. The police quickly discovered that the skid marks left on the road didn't match the angle of the crash. Additionally, the fact that Matt had failed to brake until the last second raised even more red flags. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras revealed that Matt had been tailing John's car for miles, only to swerve directly into his lane at the moment of impact. As the evidence mounted, Matt's story started to fall apart. His frantic defensive demeanor during the investigation only added fuel to the fire. It wasn't just an accident. It was a calculated move, one that appeared to have been intended to intimidate John and his family. Meanwhile, the lawyer continued to gather evidence of Lisa and Matt's financial mismanagement. The lawyer presented further details of their joint involvement in the draining of their father's accounts and Lisa's reckless spending. The public exposure of their financial fraud, combined with the revelations about the crash, sent shockwaves through the family. With Matt now a prime suspect in both the financial fraud and the crash, John felt a sense of grim satisfaction. He had been patient, steadfast in his belief that the truth would come out. Now it had, and Lisa and Matt were beginning to realize that their grip on the inheritance was slipping. Despite the chaos around him, John remained unwavering. He knew that Lisa and Matt had been manipulating the situation from the beginning, but he wouldn't let them drag him or his family down further. The damage to their reputations was severe, and John wasn't about to let them continue their lies any longer. The news of the financial mismanagement and the crash spread like wildfire. Local news stations picked up the story, and before long, the entire town knew about Lisa and Matt's destructive path. The details of their fraudulent behavior, their lavish spending, and the suspicious crash became public knowledge. The media painted them both as greedy, reckless individuals, and their once perfect image was completely shattered. As more people learned of the accusations against them, Lisa and Matt's lives seemed to spiral further out of control. They had never been prepared for the fallout of their actions, And now they were facing public humiliation as well as legal consequences. Days later, John stood outside his mother's home, his fists clenched in frustration. After receiving an anonymous tip-off about some of the missing valuables, he had come to a painful realization. Lisa and Matt had been stealing from their mother. He hadn't wanted to believe it at first, but the evidence was undeniable. Their greed knew no bounds. John stormed into the house, his voice rising. "Lisa! Matt! What the hell have you done?" Lisa looked up, guilt flashing in her eyes, but it was Matt who stood in front of her, blocking the door to the living room. "You've gone too far," John continued, his voice cold. "You've taken from Mom. I know everything." Matt's eyes narrowed as he moved to stand in front of Lisa. "You don't understand," he hissed. "We need to make a deal. You don't want to fight us. You can still get something out of this." John's anger flared. "Make a deal?" he repeated, incredulous. "There's nothing left for you to take. You've already destroyed everything. You think you can just manipulate me into letting you off the hook." Matt stepped forward aggressively, his fist tightening. "You don't get it. You've been playing the good guy for so long, John. But we're the ones who've been dealing with the mess your father left behind. You're not going to walk away from this." John's gaze was unwavering. "I don't need anything from you, Matt. I've got my family, my integrity, and the truth on my side. You've got nothing left." Just then the lawyer entered the room, his face grim. "I'm afraid the charges have been formalized," he announced, cutting through the tension. "Matt, you're facing serious criminal charges for fraud, theft, and attempted harm to John." Matt's face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, his confidence crumbling as the truth of his situation sank in. His future was now uncertain, and there was no way to talk his way out of this one. Lisa, who had remained silent, finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her face pale. "I thought I could fix it. I thought we could have it all." Her words were laced with regret, but it was too late for apologies. The damage had been done. The trust between her and her family was shattered beyond repair, and Lisa was left to confront the truth of her greed and entitlement. As the reality of their downfall set in, John couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. Despite the years of tension and bitterness, despite the chaos that had unfolded, he had won. He didn't need the inheritance. He had already built his own life with hard work and integrity. That was what mattered now. He turned to his mother, who had stood by quietly throughout the ordeal. "We'll take care of you, Mom. You're not alone." For John, the final choice was clear. He wouldn't press for more. He had everything he needed, and as for Lisa and Matt, they would have to live with the consequences of their actions. In the weeks following the legal battles, the downfall of Lisa and Matt was swift and unforgiving. Their assets were frozen, and they were left penniless, their attempts to avoid legal consequences failing at every turn. The once privileged couple found themselves facing public humiliation, rejected by both their family and the community. The once strong bonds they had used to manipulate others crumbled, leaving them isolated and alone. For John, life began to return to normal. The dust settled, and the tension in his home gradually eased. He focused on his work, finding solace in his career, and grew even closer to his wife and children. They created new memories, rebuilding the foundation that had been rattled by the storm of family betrayal. However, as John reflected on the events that had transpired, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his father's decisions. His father had seen the signs of greed and entitlement long before anyone else, and his choices, though difficult, had been made with the family's long-term well-being in mind. John learned the hard way that material wealth was not a substitute for love, integrity, or loyalty. Greed had torn his family apart, but it had also revealed the importance of standing firm in one's values. As he looked out at the future, John knew that the past wasn't completely behind him. There were lingering questions, unresolved mysteries surrounding Lisa and Matt's actions. What had truly driven them? Was there more to their story than met the eye? The answers, though unclear, remained just beyond reach, leaving John with an unsettling sense that their tale might not be finished after all.